All right, in this lesson, we're going to start off just by kind of learning the paint a little bit, what it does, and learning what the brushes will do, and talking a little bit about atmospheric perspective. And atmospheric perspective was kind of developed by the Chinese. During the Renaissance artists kind of rediscovered what the Greeks and the Romans learned about linear perspective. Linear perspective is the idea that things go back in the distance, they appear to get smaller. That's called linear because it has to deal with line and the size of things. And the Greeks and Romans had pretty much figured that out, but then during the Dark Ages and Middle Ages, that was kind of lost. And so the Renaissance artists in the 1400s and 1500s, like Raphael and Donatello and Michelangelo, Leonardo, those guys figured out how to do that again. But the Chinese had some other way of kind of giving the illusion of depth, and that was atmospheric perspective. As things go back in the distance, they appear to get lighter and bluer. Now, we're not going to do the blue at the moment. We're just going to get lighter. So we are going to use the one few times that we're going to use black. We're going to use black today. So to start off with here, we are going to let's get this up. And I've got watercolor paper. It's about 4.5 inches by 6 inches, so it's not very big. And this is what I want you to. You're going to do multiple paintings to practice because you're going to trash some of them. I'm using just regular masking tape. I have to send some of that home with you. I forgot about that. What I want to do is maybe just give maybe 1/4 of an inch. This is way wider than it needs to be. And sorry for the audio there. That's probably a screeching sound. But what we want to do here is, oftentimes students really kind of mess this up to begin with. We want this to be parallel, and we want them to be all equal. So we want that overlapping to be equal because it does kind of produce a nice little white edge. It doesn't have to be down real tight, but it shouldn't have any wrinkles in here. See that it's nice and smooth. It's not wrinkled and not bent around. So a lot of times what I'll do is I will tape down a couple of these so that I can work multiple pictures at the same time. So my art teacher in high school, he would always do his Christmas cards this way, and he would put down like 20 of them, and then he would do 20 skies, and while they were drying, he would go back up and do 20 grounds, and he would kind of mass produce them a little bit. Each one was individual, but it was still kind of mass produced. So what you can do is you could tape it down to your kitchen table, but that's going to be a little inconvenient if you're going to take a long time to paint this. So I'm going to send home just a piece of cardboard. This is a piece of masonite. It's basically a particle board that I used to airbrush on. Now that's why that's all designs here. That was airbrushed. But whatever it's going to be is going to keep it stable. So it needs to be kind of a thicker piece of cardboard if you're going to do it, because it will warp. Now, so what happens is when we wet this paper, if we look at paper microscopically on its edge, draw this out, the paper has a thickness to it, and then when water comes here and sits on this, it starts to sink in to the paper, and when that happens, then this gets when the paper starts to absorb the water, it has no place to go, so it has to get bigger. So just like a sponge you've seen, kind of expands as it gets wetter and wetter. And so then the top part of this paper wants to go big, and this bottom side wants to stay where it is, and so it ends up curling the paper because this top side has to get thicker or has to get longer, and the bottom side wants to stay the same length. And so then you get this bubbling effect, and that's not very fun to paint on. Now, this does not eliminate it completely, but it does help. Now, sometimes professional watercolor artists will do something called stretch their paper. Stretching their paper is they'll soak their entire paper so that both sides are wet, and then they'll either tape it down with masking tape or they'll tape it down with kind of packing tape, and then let it dry. And then when it dries, it wants to shrink, but it can't because it's taped down, and then it gets really tight. This, for small paintings, this is going to be absolutely fine, and it's the cheapest way of doing it. So what we're going to start off with is I'm going to try a sky, and in order to do that, I've got kind of some dirty water, but it's going to be dirty anyway in a little bit. So I'm going to get my brush kind of wet, and let me get this down here, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see. Okay, I'm going to wet this. I'm going to use the side of my brush, and I'm going to come down. I'm going to go all the way down here on this one. And I want to use long strokes, and I want to cover the whole paint or the paper. Now, so it's nice and long. I can see it. I kind of look down along the side of it. It's all wet, but it's all consistently wet. I don't want to have big puddles of some extra water and then some that are just barely dry. Okay, so I want to go long strokes. I always tell my elementary students, not like grandma strokes where you get tired halfway and then you got to take a break and tired. You want to go clear off onto the tape. Okay, no offense to grandmas because I'm a grandpa. So so then I'm going to get a little bit of black. I'm going to get some water on here, and this is just where it takes some practice. And so you might want to even have just a piece of any kind of other paper, maybe even notebook paper, to try this color out on. And it's behind the screen so you can't see it. Let's see. And we can just try it and see how dark we want it. So one of the things about atmospheric perspective, I'm going to keep kind of mix a little bit more, and you can see me working this into the brush. So I don't want to just dip in here and then start painting, because the tip of my brush is going to be have a lot of paint on it, and the back of it's not going to have any, and then I'm going to get really inconsistent skies. So it is called watercolor for it's not called watercolor not for nothing, because I need a lot of water. And so as I do this, I get that not clear up here to the ferrule or anything, but I just need to get a good amount here. And then I'm going to go long strokes. I'm going to start at the top, and I'm going to work my way down, and I'm kind of overlapping as I go. And I'm just going to come down and fade it out till it's almost white. So this is going to be the ground, but it's going to be so light. So just naturally what happens is my brush is going to lose paint as it comes down, and it's going to naturally give me this gradient. And the gradient is going from one color to the next. So I've got a little bit darker here, and it's going to be kind of hard for you to see. Maybe I should let me exaggerate that just a little bit, or let me change the exposure here. You can see it. No. Let me just do it one more time. Now, we don't want to do this too many times, and that was kind of bad there. Because if I rub this too much, it's kind of like rubbing your skin too much, you end up making it sore because you're actually rubbing the skin particles. And so I can actually destroy kind of the paper texture, and it'll get me these little fuzz bunnies if I go too much. It's going to be a real subtle sky here. So I want you to try one with just that synthetic sable round, and then I want you to try one with the mop. Okay. So, just so you know, if you want to look at this, my water container, you can use anything because it cleans up nice. But let me hold up here. You can see that I've got a little depression in here. I just threw this in Mrs. Rossiter's class, and I just threw a regular bowl, but then I just took my fingers and kind of pinched down, and that allows me to keep my brush and it doesn't roll away from it. But so if you have Mrs. Rossiter's ceramics class, you might want to make yourself one of these. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing over here. I'm going to get it wet, and back up here, zoom out a bit. And so I'm going to get this wet right here. Again, This doesn't take as much time because that mop holds a lot more water. And if you can see, there's a big streak or so. I can kind of go through that. There was a kind of a puddle forming. I can just kind of suck that up, or I can take a paper towel and dry it off a little bit. And then I'm going to get some black in here. I want to work it into my brush. And I'm going to long strokes. I kind of stopped right there and it kind of puddled, and it leaves a little darker space. Okay, so I got a little bit of a streakiness. Ideally, and I have this, and I'll do this in later ones, ideally I like to have my palette tipped maybe 15 or 20 degrees, and then the water just naturally kind of cascades down and blends some of that out. So if you want to do that, you put a little book or almost anything underneath your cardboard to get it up maybe an inch or two, maybe 3 inches. It'll just kind of naturally fall. So a lot of times watercolor boards are up and down. But you can see this one is a pretty even gradient. It's not very dark. We're going super subtle because the sky is a long, long ways away. And then as it comes closer and closer to the horizon line, it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. So that's basically how we're going to start that. Then we need to let that dry just a little bit. It doesn't have to be completely dry. I'll wash that out. And I forgot to get a new paper towel. I typically always have a paper towel right here and dry off my brush. Sorry, I try not to hit the camera. And now I'm going to put some background hills in. So this is going to be less water. And this is where it just takes some time to figure out what's the right consistency. So again, I'd have that other piece of paper and kind of dab a little bit. So I don't want to get too dark. I want to, it's called protecting my values. I want to protect my value, because if I get too dark on the first hill, then I have no place to go, and I want 3 sets of hills here that are going to get progressively darker and darker and darker. So if I start off with black, I'm done for the beginning. So I'm basically about halfway up here. Let's zoom in again. Center it. And notice how my brush is, I'm laying it down quite a bit. So as opposed to standing it straight up and down. So it's not laying down completely on the board, but I'm probably at a 30 degrees off of the board or so. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go here. And if it bleeds a little bit up in here, that's okay. That's why I wanted the water to be, or the paper to be a little bit wet, because I wanted that to be kind of soft and fuzzier. This is actually almost dry here. So it just is really soft. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to flatten out the bottom, maybe a little bit of water here, so that that just blends out. Nice long strokes, and I'm kind of laying my brush down. I'm not holding it straight up and down. So that's going to be some fuzzy hills. Those are a long, long way away. Okay. So then what we're going to do is we're going to work both of these at the same time. So if you screw one up, which you're going to screw one up, you have another one. So probably going to end up doing 4 of them, and you're going to turn in the best one of that. So here I'm going to do the same thing. I want this to be irregular, and I'm kind of pushing it, almost letting the brush separate. Typically I always want to paint in the direction that the brush is. It's like petting a cat backwards. I don't want to go side to side too awful much, because you can see how the hairs kind of separate. I go like that. But in this case, that's kind of what I want to have happen. Adjust my camera. And I'm just going to fade it out, but I'm going long off into on the tape. Okay. Now that's going to be starting to dry. This, I didn't really add a whole lot of water, so this isn't going to take too long to dry here. And so I'm going to go back and forth, and if I notice that I got too dark one, then I'm going to lighten up, add a little bit more water. So you can see my palette has hardly any paint on it. So you're not mixing up a gallon of paint because it's going to go a long, long ways. Okay. The next one is we're going to get a little bit darker. And when I was demonstrating there the palette earlier, I dropped some water in here, and this is almost too wet right now. And it's having a hard time figuring out what I want. So if you put your hand on it and it feels cool, it's still wet. Now this next one you want to be a little bit drier. It doesn't have to be bone dry, but it should be a little bit drier. Now if you want to speed things up, I have, especially at home you could do this, I have a hairdryer. And so I'll blow dry something and speed things up. So most watercolor artists do, but it's not going to be really possible in our face-to-face meetings, and probably not for you as well. But just so you know, that's what the industry does. So now I'm going to come a little bit below, and remember I talked about not trying to make it, we don't want it to be a roller coaster, just and not regular. So nature is not regular. So it's got a little bump down here, then it comes up maybe a little higher. And remember, these are still a long ways away. So we don't need a lot of detail. Okay, so sometimes I'm going to start a little bit below, maybe come up, maybe even almost above. That, and just let those background hills peek through. And then I'm going to again spread that out, get a little bit of water, and fade it out to nothing. Now again, you can't press very hard, because what's going to happen is you're going to start to tear that paper and it's going to turn into fuzz bunnies. So, but this is, you know, really, really light. Let's see if I can darken a little bit there, as you can kind of see the effect a little bit better. And I'll do the same thing down here. So they say that good guys, you're going to have to do 100 paintings before you get something really good. But hopefully we can get something, hopefully you get my experience of my paintings, and so you don't have to wait 100 paintings before you get something good. Here, longer. And so they're going to all look a little bit differently. I mean, my high hills are a little bit taller here and stuff. So then again, I'm going to let it dry, and I don't think you probably want to hear my hair dryer, but I'll do that super fast. Leave it alone. So again, we want to protect those values. It can't be pure black here, because then I don't have any place else to go. So I need a little bit darker now. But I still don't want pure black. I'm getting closer though. And maybe this one will come up here and dip down. These hills are still a long ways away. If I work kind of quickly, I'm going to fade on out. Same thing down here. See, I'm kind of just pushing it up there, kind of thinking about like little trees, because it's going to be kind of irregular, and then I'll flatten out the bottom. A little bit of water there, got a little streaky. It's a lot more streaky when it gets dry. So a little bit of streak is okay, because we're going to make some ground and grass here. So this is going to take you a little bit of time. You're going to mess up. You're going to be frustrated. because you got way too dark, or you tried to go over it too much and you said, oh, I gotta scrub a little bit here. But you notice that I have this kind of economy of motion here. As we go boom one time and I'm done, and I go across, cross, cross, and I'm done. So watercolor is really kind of a spontaneous type of medium, so not real forgiving. It's hard to go back over top of it. Like acrylic or oils, you can go back or scrape it off. This is not. The whole idea of watercolor is it's really a fresh, kind of quick medium. So I'm going to go again, just make sure this is dry. That doesn't take too long. And now we're going to get pretty black, not perfectly black, but pretty black. And now this is going to be a much flatter kind of thing. This is like the foreground. So we have the background, middle ground, foreground, and then this can be pretty black and not very bumpy. And it can get maybe a little bit lighter, but we don't really want it to get a whole lot lighter as it comes down. So I did kind of go over it a little bit. So this one I did everything with the sable, with the synthetic sable. This one I did the mop on the sky, but then the rest of the hills has to be done with this. It's not going to be done with the mop. Okay. And this isn't too black. Probably could have gotten that a little bit darker. Okay, so that's the first step. Clean out my brush all the time. I want to make sure that my brush is being pointed to let it dry. I'm not squeezing. I'm not wrapping around trying to like draw it out of a sword scabbard or anything like that. I'm just touching it. It's a little damp. It's okay, but I want to make sure that that's a nice sharp point. Then when I'm done, I want to let it dry. I'm going to do this quicker for you, but I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to pull the tape away from the picture. If I pull it this way, then a lot of times I'll take the top layer of paper and rip it out, and then I'll get a rip across my paper. So I want to pull it out, and my fingers are almost touching the board here. Pull it away. Pull it away. Actually, do it in the same order that I put it down, in reverse order. The nice thing about this is that white makes kind of a nice, neat little, cool little frame without having to do anything else. Now, I should have probably had this like 1 inch or 3/4 inch tape instead of this big thick stuff. So. And there we are. Zoom in a little bit. So, atmospheric perspective, it looks a little bit light right here. It goes dark and then gets light. But that's atmospheric. It kind of gives it a little bit of a fog. You're looking through more air, so that's going to be kind of diffuse the light a little bit more. I know it's pretty basic, but this is going to give us a really good idea of how to control our paint. See, I protected my values, so if I would have gotten too dark here, then I wouldn't have been able to get this dark here. So I have to stay light, a little bit darker, a little bit darker, a little bit darker. Okay, so then what you're going to do is do like 4 of those, and then give me the best one. And so you'll take a photograph of it, try to photograph it straight down as much as possible. Make sure that you're not getting too close, otherwise it oftentimes doesn't focus. So that'll give us a good idea, and then when you're completely done, you can sign it, but at the moment I want you to sign it on the left-hand side in the white margin. So I would do it there. I always start at the left-hand side typically, is because then if I get a little bit too big, I'm not running out of room. So if I start over here and start writing curt dry, and I don't want to go up the side. Oh, couldn't see it off camera. So if I start too early here, I go curt dry, and that looks really bad. So the left-hand side, you got plenty of room. If you start right on this margin, start right where your image starts, don't start clear over here, makes it look a little neater. Okay, good luck, and I'd love to see your work. We'll see you soon in the next one.